Greetings from the set of Metro and More at Metropolitan Community College, serving more than 50,000 students with over 120 programs at our 8 locations in the daytime, evening, weekends, or online. And I'm your host, Kent Pavelka. Welcome again to Metro and More of what you need to know about Metropolitan Community College. Great to have you along with us again for the hour ahead. We're going to be talking about Black Eagle and Dr. King's Dream at Metropolitan Community College with actor Shawn Hamilton, the Mixed Blood Theater Company, appearing recently at Metropolitan Community College in conjunction with Black History Month programming at the college. Good to have you with us, Shawn.
Thanks, great to be here, Kent.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about the reason for your appearance at Metro.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm an actor, and I've been doing it for, quite a few years. Originally out of Houston, but in the Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, for the last 20-some years. I've worked at a variety of theaters around. I've done everything from Shakespeare to circus work, to musician work, to just about everything. I've toured with a musical. I was just talking about, I've been through the Omaha area with another musical I was on with Melissa Gilbert, Little House on the Prairie, the musical. So it's great to be back in the area. I was looking around and said, oh, I've been here. This is a beautiful town.
Good.
Yeah, some great memories here.
How did you manage, how did you get from Houston to Minneapolis? What's that story?
You know, it's the story of a kid just kind of following that artistic dream. You know, I started out as a sax player. Was a flute player, sax player. I moved up into a college that was great for jazz music, and from there, on a lark, I went with a buddy of mine on an audition for some league schools out east, and I just kind of went for the fun of it, but I ended up getting in, and so then I spent the next 3 years of my life out at Yale. And from there, I ended up coming back out to Minneapolis. So you just never know where you're going to get thrown in life.
So that you got your bachelor's at Yale?
I got my bachelor's at North Texas State as
Okay.
a music major, and then I ended up with a theater major at Yale.
Very good.
Yeah.
And you've been in Minneapolis since?
I've been in Minneapolis ever since.
With Mixed Blood Theater?
Mixed Blood Theater and a variety of theaters that are around. I've done quite a few theaters, a lot of different kinds of work. I'm a freelance actor. I do everything.
Very good.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but the saxophone comes in handy in the presentation that you gave at Metro.
It does. One of the shows that I'm touring right now is about an astronaut named Ronald McNair.
Yes.
And he was a sax player. He
Yeah.
played soprano sax, and there's a very famous picture of him in space floating around playing the soprano saxophone. So it worked out really well for this show.
Yeah, we want to focus on that particular performance too, because that's what you gave here at Metro, right?
That's right, last night.
Black Eagle. Tell us about Mixed Blood Theater and the history of the company.
Well, you know, Mixed Blood Theater came around at a time when, the theater movement was, it was early 70s. There was a lot of experimentation going on, and a group of kids got together coming out of a summer program and just said, let's get together and let's do the work we want to do. So they did midnight shows of comic book plays, and they did they did Mammoth and all that hard edge theater, that small theater kind of stuff that doesn't pay, but that really fills your soul. And so it comes out of that idea, and also the idea of Dr. King's Dream, where just because of the way you were born doesn't mean that you're going to have to play that part for the rest of your life. The idea is that, you mix it up a little, mixed blood theater, and so, you mix up races and hierarchies and ages, and so when you come and see a show at Mixed Blood Theater, you're not going to get what you expect.
Where is the theater in Minneapolis?
It's located in a firehouse off of Cedar and Riverside, over in that old sort of hippie area over on Cedar and Riverside in Minneapolis. Yeah.
And it's been going nonstop since the 70s?
It's been going nonstop since the 70s. It's in a funky little neighborhood, and like I say, it's in an old 19th century firehouse. So when you first come in the door, what you really are in is where the old horse stalls used to be, and you can see the giant cobblestones there, and it's a beautiful building, beautiful old building. But it really fits into that funky vibe of the neighborhood. So it's a real gem in that neighborhood.
What does the house hold?
It holds about 300 to 400, depending on how you lay it out. You can take it totally down to the walls, and you can lay it out any way you want to lay it, but about 300 to 400.
And so what all's presented there throughout a year, given year?
Oh my goodness, you know, they just had a disability festival which just knocked your socks off. There were plays about people having with a hard of hearing, and there were plays about Alzheimer's, and also plays about you know, mental disabilities, and beautiful plays. We also had a festival that was about the Hindu gods. You know, there's another mixed blood play that's about to come out called The Deaf Duckling that we're going to be putting out as a one-man show. There's a musical that's coming up called Passing Strange. So just about a little bit of everything.
When you say another mixed blood play,
yeah,
you do at the theater other works beyond what mixed blood does. Explain.
Well, mixed blood does a variety of kinds of work. Sometimes we do corporate theater. Sometimes we do the touring shows, like I'm doing right now with the one-man shows of King and Ron McNair. But they'll also do, you know, what you call straight plays and musicals that are just set up as entertainments for audiences. But there's always something behind it. So, you know, we'll have a full season from September through May. And that'll be, you know, just a regular play season where you'll come in and you'll take your seat and you'll get your program, and the lights will come down and we'll do the play. And then we have a series of plays where we go out and we come to you and we bring our show and, you know, our van and our things and like that. So it's a variety of different kinds of works within the umbrella of the theater.
So the off season is May through September or through August?
Off season is usually May through September, but even then the space is being rented out by community groups and all kinds of other small theaters. So you never know what you're going to see when you walk in.
Well, who started it?
It was started by Jack Ruler. He was a young man who started the theater in the 70s with a group of his friends. And if you look at the original picture when the theater was started, a lot of those guys went on to found other theaters in town. There's a theater called Penumbra Theater that's run by a fellow named Lou Bellamy. He is in that picture of the starting of this very small theater. So this theater became the start of a theater movement, a small theater movement within Minneapolis after it, you know, started.
Are there original members still participating?
I think Jack is the last one that's left. I think everybody else has kind of moved on, but Jack is one of the few last ones that's left. Yeah.
Full-time staff, or how does that work?
They have a pretty full-time staff. It's what you call a mid-range theater, so about a staff of maybe 5 to 6, and a lot of really energetic young people who come through and kind of, you know, fill in the spaces. It's what you call a starter job in theater. It's you know, what you're going to make there is you'll have a chance to have a lot of responsibility and to work on a lot of shows and do a lot of great stuff. But eventually, when you get your skills up, you'll probably move on to a larger theater.
Is there a explicit mission that differentiates mixed blood theater from others?
The mission is really to follow the idea of Dr. King's dream and the idea of social pluralism. And that really means sort of fairness in casting, and also the idea that the people, maybe the guy who is the boss is maybe not going to be the big white dude, you know, maybe it's going to be somebody else, you know. And so we try to change up the idea of the power dynamics within that theater, and that's really the mission, is following Dr. King's dream of social pluralism as evidenced on stage.
And then the work that you do at the theater versus what you do on tour with the one-man, do you only do the one-man shows on tour?
Only the one-man shows on tour.
And that would be Black Eagle and the Dr. King?
There's Black Eagle, there's a Dr. King show. We also have another one-woman show that's called Daughters of Africa, in which a beautiful actress named Thomasina Petrus goes through a sort of history of African-American women in song. It's a beautiful show. We have a new show that's coming out called The Deaf Duckling, which explores hearing disabilities in the young. And we also have another show called Mexicanos that explores the immigration of Hispanic Americans into the upper Midwest.
Are these plays that were written for mixed blood, or or borrowed
No, they were all written for mixed blood theater, or commissioned by mixed blood theater for their audiences. Yeah.
So you have hired others to write works.
Oh,
for
definitely.
You. Yeah.
Yeah, we have several plays that we do, and there's always a rotation of new plays that are coming in because, of course, you know, tastes change and issues change as well.
Sure.
We have a new play that's starting to go out that's about Muslim Americans, so we're very proud about that one too.
Tell us about the experience of doing a one-man show. I mean, is it way more difficult than interacting with other actors?
You know, I think really it's a mental game. It's once you get over the mental anxiety of it, and you're able to move through, it works out pretty well. You know, as the Doors say, you know, an actor all alone, riders on the storm. You know, there's that anxiety that when you first do it, of seeing an audience out there and knowing that you have to carry this thing through at least 45 minutes to an hour. And so for me, just getting past the anxiety was the biggest part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's anxiety that you do not have, or a different kind of anxiety that if you're working with other actors.
You've got, you know, it's like if you're in a sports game. You know, you've always got somebody to pass that ball to that takes the pressure off of you for just a little bit, and then they pass it back. And so, you know, you're not alone out there. But in a one-man show, it's just you. You're passing the ball back and forth to yourself, or really you're passing it back and forth to multiple characters of yourself, you know, within that show. So it's just about getting used to working with yourself on stage.
How long have you been doing the Black Eagle show?
Black Eagle since about 2006. That's the one I've been doing the longest with old Ron. Dr. King I just started this year, about 2-3 weeks ago.
Well, so the anxieties are probably still there with the Dr. King show a little bit.
It is
versus Black Eagle.
It is, but sometimes that anxiety is good. You know,
it keeps you fresh.
It keeps you fresh. It's that moment when you're standing on the cliff before you jump off, hopefully with a hang glider, with the hang glider or the bungee cord. It's a fear, but it's also an excitement of being able to of having that adrenaline rush. I think it's a lot of the same thing that. You know, like I say, like if you're starting a basketball game, or if you race cars, something like that. To me, it has that same kind of fear. You also love that fear.
You have to have it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Otherwise, it's going to be flat.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're not a little bit afraid, there's something wrong.
Or on edge, or something.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting how over time it varies how you feel when it's time to do it.
When that moment comes.
Yeah.
I had a show that I did once, and it was a touring show. And whenever I heard the opening music of that show, I immediately had to go to the bathroom. I would hear it, I would be like, ah, and I would have to head for the bathroom. And it was just that anxiety, and I would feel it every night. And once I got out there and I started working, it was fine. But I think it's because I had too much time to think.
Yeah.
I had too much time before I had to be out there.
How many times have you done Black Eagle?
My goodness. I'm going to have to guess here. I'm imagining I've probably done it about 120 times now.
Yeah. And you did
it's an old friend now. Black Eagle is an old friend.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
45 minutes on stage by yourself.
Yeah.
And you did it twice here at Metro while you were here, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Once last night, and then again, and very soon, in about an hour or so.
There's Dr. Robert McNair, astronaut and physicist, of course, killed aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. Mm-hmm. And that's what the play is about his life. Mm-hmm. When was this written?
This play was written in 1994, about 1994. The Challenger accident was January 28th, 1986. So. A little under 10 years after the event.
And who wrote it?
It was written by a man by the name of Mr. Warren Bowles. He's a great guy. He also put together and wrote the Dr. King show that I do as well. But he did a lot of research on it. He actually went down to South Carolina, where Ron McNair is from. He interviewed his brothers down there, and had a chance to talk to his wife, and he got a lot of materials on Ron's life that he was able to use in the play.
Beyond the obvious that Dr. Ronald McNair was someone that needed to have this done in his memory, what was the motivation for writing this? Do you know? I mean, what was the focus of?
Well, the thing about Ron's life is that he was a physical embodiment of the idea of Dr. King's dream of self-improvement and of self-empowerment, and he was born in 1950, and so he lived through a lot of that period of segregation that existed in the South at that point. But through his life story, he was able to overcome quite a few difficulties to rise to the level that he did as an African-American astronaut, which was a very unusual thing. In fact, Ron McNair was scheduled to be the first black astronaut, but he had his ribs injured in a car wreck and he was pulled off of that mission. So he would have been the first black astronaut in space. So he ended up being the second black astronaut in space. I talk about that in the show, about how the pressure of being the first can be very strong. But he was a living embodiment of that idea of struggle and overcoming, and I think that's why he was a very important character in our nation's history.
Who was the first black astronaut?
Guy Bluford, Guion Bluford, is short for Guy, G-U-I-O-N, Guion Bluford. Yeah.
And how long before Dr. McNair did he precede him in space?
Well, they were in the same class. There are pictures of him and Ron McNair and another astronaut, three black astronauts, all of them in what they call the class, the same astronaut class. So Guion went, maybe 2 flights before Ron.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 flights before Ron.
Yeah.
Ron had already gone up in the Challenger, and that's where those famous pictures are of him with the soprano saxophone.
Almost makes you wonder why Guion wasn't the subject of the play, although maybe the premature death.
Well, exactly right, exactly right. And if you remember on the Challenger, there was a lot of attention given to Mrs. Krista McAuliffe, who was that program. She was called the first teacher in space. NASA at that time
First female, wasn't she, or not?
No, not the first female. She was not the first female in space, but it was a program where NASA wanted to show that space travel was safe and friendly, and honestly, the program had lost some interest in the public at that point, and they were really trying to build up the excitement of the public in the NASA program again. And that was one of the ways they were trying to do, is to get the educators involved and try to get all the kids involved in a closed circuit on that mission.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Something's telling me that back then that she really wasn't an astronaut per se. She was just kind of trained enough to be able to go on the flight.
That's exactly right. She was a private citizen. She had won a contest in order to be the first private citizen in space. And to be an educator in space. So NASA was hoping that this would be the beginning of a great partnership between educators and the Space Administration.
The play is called Black Eagle. Eagle meaning flying.
Yes,
in honor of Dr. McNair.
Yes.
Tell us his life story. He was, as you said, born in 1950, died in the Challenger explosion in 1986. Lake City, South Carolina.
Lake City, South Carolina. He was the third of, he was a middle child of 3 children. He was valedictorian of his high school. One of the famous stories about Ron is that when he was 9 years old, of course, at that point, South Carolina, Lake City was totally a segregated town. He had decided that he wanted some books from the town's library, but it was a segregated library. And Ron went in and got his books and refused to leave until they let him check those books out. And
what year was this?
This was in 1959. This has been 1959. And they called the police on him. And he was sitting there when his mother came and saw him sitting there with his stack of books, and he was surrounded by the police because a little black boy was trying to just trying to check out some books. So he always had a very strong sense of right and he was willing to push those boundaries in order to get what he perceived as his rightful education. He was always a studious kid, and he just loved to study. He loved mathematics. He was a little unusual in that sense, that he loved math and science so much. Became a physics major at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State College, which was at that point and still is a predominantly black college. But from there, because of a program, he was allowed to go to MIT for a semester of his junior year. And when he was there, he was really inspired by the other scientists and the minds that were at MIT. And so he applied again when he graduated from A&T, and he went back to MIT for his graduate studies, and he graduated with a PhD in physics from MIT, which was a very unusual thing for anybody at the time, not to mention a young black boy growing up in South Carolina in the 50s. And from there, he applied to the astronaut training. He became an expert in laser spectrography. So that was his main.
Do you know what that is?
Well, it's looking at the. You're actually an actor. First of all, you're actually an actor.
Well, I know, but you play him.
I know. The wavelengths of a laser, I believe, and it's how you break up the wavelengths of a laser. So you can change a laser's light beam to do different things. And so he was an expert at what all those different changes and that. I'm getting as close as I can get.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the technology at that point in time has been is history now.
But still, they still have lasers. I mean, we are
Sure.
still working with the basics of lasers, and that's what he was working with, the basics of lasers. And he was out at Hughes Corporation in Malibu, California. But when it came time, when there was an opportunity to apply for the astronaut program, he did, and he got in as a scientist. And so he had already gone up in Challenger once, and so this was to be the second flight of Challenger was to be a second flight. The STS-51L is the one that they call it disintegrated. They don't say blow
Explosion,
up. They
no.
don't say explosion. They say disintegrated.
Wow.
That it wasn't a classic
I
explosion.
wonder what the nuance is regarding that.
Well, you know what? I think the main thing is that what really happened was that you had a fuel fireball that kind of went off. It wasn't I have no idea.
Yeah.
As far as I know, it was a
Yeah.
fuel
For
fireball.
some reason, it was
a little bit different. Yeah.
Disintegration.
Disintegration.
Do you have any idea how this segue from being a physicist at MIT working with lasers,
Yeah.
and then the opportunity and interest in becoming an astronaut, what that was about, or how that happened?
Guy was interested in science, and I think any kid, the excitement of NASA, the excitement of the space program, any young male child growing up in the United States in the early 60s was totally turned on by the moon launches, all those that amazing stuff we saw on television. So I think that Ron grew up with that excitement, and I just think that he said, I've managed to get this far, and let's see if I can take that dream a little bit further. And he was able to do it. And there's another thing that really why I love that story and how he connects to Dr. King is that he followed that dream.
Oh, yeah.
He followed that dream as far as he could go without fear. He just said, okay, I'm going to see what I can do. I'm going to use the skills that I have, and he followed his dreams, and it led him into NASA. But I think he grew up with that space program and all that great astronaut stuff. I remember growing up, I had my Matt Mason space dolls and all that stuff, and I had my space capsule and my Gemini space capsule. Everybody grew up and loved that stuff.
Sure, we either wanted to be a fireman, an astronaut, or an athlete.
Or a cowboy if you
or
grew
a
up
cowboy. Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about the play, Shawn, a little
Sure.
bit. And maybe if you feel comfortable, well, first of all, walk us through it. Is it as a one act, or how do you do it?
It's it's interesting with a one-man show. How do you describe a one-man show? In a sense, all of it's a one act because it all happens in sort of one space. But there are sections of it. There are pieces of his history that you go, and then there's an ending, and then you go to another one, and then there's an ending. So, it's done in one sitting,
Yeah.
one 45-minute sitting. But within that, the structure of it, you follow Ron's life.
How do you get past his childhood as an adult actor?
Well, here's the thing. The setup is that Ron is because the Challenger flight was delayed several days. In fact, that's one of the issues that we can talk about it later that led to the accident itself, was that it was sort of a forced launch when it shouldn't have been. But the Challenger had been delayed 3 times. And so the setup of the play is that Ron has been delayed 3 times. Yet again, he's just gotten out of the capsule. And if you remember, once you're strapped inside of that capsule, you're stuck there like in a big sort of recliner. And he was in there for 6 hours. If you understand the, wearing the space diapers and the whole thing, you cannot get out. They cannot come and help you. So it's a very frustrating day for him.
So that's the beginning of it.
That's the beginning of it. And he has received a tape recording letter from a group of elementary school kids who are asking him the same sort of questions that astronauts always answer. Are you afraid? What's it like in space? You know, these questions that 8 or 9 or 11-year-olds would ask. And so he decides to take the time, instead of going to a meeting, to answer the questions from these kids.
But he's no longer in the spacecraft at this
No,
point.
no, no. He's gone back to his office.
They get him out.
They get him out. He's very frustrated, and in order to blow off a little steam, he's decided to play the saxophone for a little bit. But then he's called up for a meeting, and Ron, which was very unusual for him, decides that no, he's gonna make him wait for a little while, and he's gonna try to decompress by talking to these kids for a little while. He's gonna try to remember why he's doing all this for a little bit.
And how is he going to communicate that to him?
He does it through a tape recorder.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so this is just several minutes into the play.
Several minutes into the play.
Well, so can you give us a little snippet of that
Oh, sure,
scene, and
absolutely.
then maybe we can kind of tell the story of the play that way.
All right.
So he's out of the spacecraft, and now he's going to communicate with these kids.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. You know, first of all, he starts off talking to these kids, and he gets a little upset because one of his students has asked him a question about his college, about his Negro college. And she says that her mother says that Negro colleges are not as good as the real colleges, as she calls them. And the first thing that Ron has to do is get through a little anger and sarcasm with her. And when he's finally able to get through that, he's finally able to talk to these kids one-on-one and give them a little taste of who he is. So that would be, all right.
Okay.
You know, I was born and raised in a little old town in South Carolina called Lake City. Now, as I listen to you students from Jefferson Elementary, kind of sounds like you have students of all different races going to school together. But you know, when I grew up, there was a railroad track that went right through the middle of town. And that railroad track was a strict dividing line between white and black. Oh, I know when you read in your history books about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and bus boycotts and blacks sitting on the back of the bus and all that, I bet you think that happened oh so long ago. Well, I'm here to tell you that's how I grew up. And you know, we wanted more than to just be able to sit on the front of a bus. We wanted to break down the barriers that were making us poorer and poorer and less educated. All right, look, let me give you an example. Now, when I was about 11 years old, I had a job as a delivery boy for a local drugstore. I mean, you know, we take the orders for prescriptions or whatever, and then we get on our bicycles and we go off and deliver them. Now, there were 2 little white boys, and there was 1 black boy. That was me. You know, I always thought that the only reason they even had a black delivery boy was so they would have somebody to make deliveries on the streets where they had all those big, mean dogs. I mean, somebody who they wouldn't miss if the dog just kind of caught them and ate them up, because it seemed like I had all the streets with all those mean dogs. Well, anyway, we were back at the drugstore. I watched as those 2 little white boys, they went over to the book rack, and they got a book. And they went over to the counter, lunch counter, just a little bitty table there. They sat down, and they started to read. Now, I said to myself, that is a pretty good idea. So I went out and I got me a book, and I sat right down beside him. Well, I wasn't there but 2 minutes before the white owner of that drugstore came running over, all red and hot and bothered, and said, "Boy, you can't sit there like that. Get your behind up and move away from there." Now, I didn't mind about that. I didn't have to sit there just to read a book, so I started out to the back where the supplies were kept. And then he grabbed me, and he snatched that book out of my hand, and he said, "You don't need to be reading any books." And I went to the back, and I started to fight back the tears. Now, see, I wasn't upset because I couldn't sit at a lunch counter with those other boys. I mean, my friends Doja Montgomery and Archie Alford and I, we used to dare each other to go and sit at those segregated lunch counters just to see how long it would take for somebody to come and chase us away. No, what hurt me was that he took that book away. See, I knew that book was the thing. I knew that education would be the key to any opportunity I was ever going to have. By taking away that book, owner of that drugstore was trying to limit my opportunities. But I wasn't going to let him do that.
Very good, Shawn. Very good. So that's Dr. McNair.
Yes.
Right. How many months before the actual shuttle mission?
Oh, that's when he was a child.
Oh.
That's
No, but I mean, he's telling them.
Oh yes.
That
Well, that but the day before.
Day before.
Day before.
This is the day before.
The shuttle had been it had been delayed on Saturday. It had been delayed on Sunday. It was delayed on Monday, which is the day that we're talking about here, and it was finally launched on Tuesday when it really shouldn't have been launched on Tuesday.
And that segues back to the part of the conversation earlier about the incident in the library. Same theme. Whatever happened? I did some research. I know, but to share what happened with that, his mother came in, and they eventually allowed. How did the library thing end up?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm not sure about the exact details of it, but I know that his mother came down to that library. She saw him there. The police were there with him. And somehow they managed to convince the library that that he would actually bring the books back, and they gave him the books.
Yeah.
And so they had never let a black student take books out of that library before. Ron was the first one that was allowed to do that.
He was 9 years old?
He was 9 years old. 9 years old.
Do we know, did his parents, how much did his parents have to do with his psyche and his, I mean, obviously he's very intelligent,
Sure,
we know that.
Sure, you know, his parents, his mother was a teacher, and his dad, I believe, was, I believe that he worked in an office building. So he came from very humble beginnings. Ron just had an interest in the sciences.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that stuff comes. You never know where that one kid out of three, you never know how that's going to flip around. But you know, he also worked as a sharecropper in the summers. He would pick tobacco, he would pick cotton, he would pick beans and cucumbers, because that was the summer work that was available for young boys at that time. And you know, if things had remained the same, and if Ron had remained the same, that would have been his future as well. He would have been, you know, out in those fields picking beans, cucumbers, or tobacco, or cotton, you know, depending on the season. That's what was available for young men growing up in Lake City at that time.
Where is Lake City, South Carolina?
Matt, that's a good point. I'm not really sure.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
I guess the amazing thing too is that obviously he availed himself of the opportunity he had in high school, because otherwise, I mean, he wouldn't have been able to succeed. He wouldn't have had the tools. Wouldn't have been prepared to succeed at North Carolina A&T.
But he also had encouragement. You know, he talks about his fifth grade teacher. He talks about the strong role models that he had in his principals, who would accept nothing less than excellence from those students. And that's the deal. I think you need to expect excellence from kids. Otherwise, you're not going to get it. They'll rise to the level that you expect from them. And I think a lot of people expected excellence from Ron.
Including his parents.
Including
obviously.
His parents, very much so. Including his parents. Yeah.
His mother had not been a school teacher. You wonder if he would have gotten that motivation.
I know, exactly. Yeah.
So this is the first part of the play, and so where does it go from there?
You follow Ron's life. You follow his life from there into A&T. You follow him to MIT.
So it goes backwards, in other words.
It starts back and you move forward.
Okay.
Yeah, you start in.
So that segment you gave us there is later on in the play.
No, that was early in the play. So that's the early part of the play as he's growing up, and as the play moves on,
as he's growing up. Okay.
Yes, and then you move forward to the moment that we're back at.
So you
right
are
now.
actually playing the 9-year-old McNair.
I am playing the Ron. Yes,
I
don't play him in a suit and tie, but I play 9-year-old.
Big voice for a 9-year-old there.
No, I do my best. I do my best.
That's great. Mesmerizing.
Yeah.
So then you move from there to where for the next real point of the presentation?
Well, we move through his life. We go to A&T, where he was studying physics, and he had maybe decided to give up physics because he thinks that maybe his music education might be a little bit easier than trying to get through all the difficulty of physics. But he remembers the words of his principal about not giving up. From there we go to MIT, where he understands that life is not, there's an assumption that life is going to be better for black people in the North. And Ron kind of puts a little bit of a blanket on that when he says that even in the North, he still had some difficulties. He talks about hitchhiking to a friend's house and being waylaid by some guys, and of having to sort of fight his way out of trouble. Ron was also a black belt in karate. He was a 5th degree black belt in karate. And
So he successfully fought his way out of
he
it.
had to fight, yeah, he did pretty well. He's, the play talks about how he normally, tries to avoid, that kind of physical confrontation. He believed in Dr. King's dream. But if he had to, yes, he had the ability to fight his way out of some trouble.
Is that a point at which you'd like to share something that from that scene, or what would you like to do next as we chronicle the kind of the play as it?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. My goodness.
Whatever feels comfortable.
Yeah. No, I think I better leave that one. I don't want to give too much of the play out.
All right.
Now. Yeah.
Okay, so he's at MIT. This is like probably 1969, 70, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. At MIT in 1969 and 70. And after that, he fills out his application for, as he calls it, astronaut candidacy. Next stop, Johnson Space Center. And he talks about how he really loves everything about being an astronaut, and his real, just sort of kid's joy at the training program. He talks about the parasailing, the scuba diving, he loved the survival training. What he really loved talking about was the vomit comet. And
The vomit comet.
The vomit comet. So, let me just give you a little short thing about
please.
that. All right. Let's see, vomit comet. Well, I guess I better explain about that. Now that's a nickname that we have for a big old KC-135 jet tanker plane. Now the inside of that plane has been modified for astronaut training purposes. They fly that plane in giant parabolic loops. So inside of that plane, from stem to stern, it's just one big padded cell. So they fly that plane in big parabolic loops. They're climbing up high, and then they go down into a steep dive. And for about 30 seconds, right there at the very top, astronaut candidates experience weightlessness, zero gravity, just like they will in space. Now, in a training flight, that plane may make 30 or even 40 of these giant parabolic loops. So it's kind of like riding the world's best roller coaster all day long. Now, you know how some people have a little trouble riding a roller coaster? So you can guess why we call it the vomit comet.
That's perfect, man. That's great. Yeah. How so this is about how far into the play? About halfway through?
Oh, this is almost towards the end. We're getting towards the end. Because the last thing that I do in the play is I go through the launch sequence of the shuttle. What he tells the kids is that, what you really want to hear is about what it's like to take a ride on the shuttle. And he goes through the entire launch sequence of the shuttle flight all the way into orbit, which is what he did in his first flight. So he went through that program. And so that's the very last thing I do, pretty much, before I leave a little message with my audience before I go.
I was going to ask you, do you come out of character and do Q&A, or do you leave the play to speak for itself? Or
I do some Q&A. I feel like that's really important to do that in the show because, like we were talking about, the Challenger, it's been, this is almost 20 years since the Challenger, so memories have become short, or they haven't been laid down at all. A lot of the kids that I do the show for
don't have a clue.
They don't have a clue. They may not even remember Challenger anymore. So I try to add a little context. Hopefully they've got a little bit of context in the beginning, but I try to have a little question and answer so we are all on the same page.
Do you leave them with a message? What do you tell them?
Well, the message basically is that when someone, no matter what the circumstances that you grow up in, at some point in your life, if you leave yourself open to new experiences, you can be inspired to try something new and maybe do something that you didn't even think you had inside of you. So the basic message is that, as you grow up, that an eagle may be raised with some chickens, but one day it's going to look up into the sky and it's going to see the other eagle. It's going to wonder what it's doing down here, and it's going to try to fly. And that's the thing, is to try to learn to fly. When you're inspired by that amazing image up there, or by great men and women and their accomplishments, that you can be inspired to learn to fly as high as they do.
That's great. Well
Yeah.
put. Is the last scene poignant in terms of the message?
That is exactly it.
Is
Yeah.
that what it was?
That is it. Is that eagle, that even if an eagle is raised with a chicken, and maybe you weren't raised to fly. You don't understand how to do it. You're raised to eat chicken feed and do everything else the other chickens eat. But if you can be inspired, if someone can inspire one child to look up and to believe that they can do more with their life, then you can change a life with that. You can change a life.
Do you have a sense of how this performance has affected audience? And I mean, you'd hope that you've inspired people yourself to do the same thing.
I hope so. You can't tell. Sometimes you throw your bread out there on the water, and you hope that there's some good that comes of it. But you look at how young these kids are. You never know. You never know what's going to change their lives, or what's going to push them in just a little bit in that direction. Then somebody else will pick them up and take them the rest of the way. And that's how it is. You help a kid for a little bit, and then hopefully somebody else grabs that baton and then moves them down. And if anything, I hope that maybe I've just given them a little push, and somebody else will take them along the rest of the way.
Sure. Shawn Hamilton, our guest, the actor in Black Eagle and in the Dr. King play as well with Mixed Blood Theater. It occurs to me that all children, regardless of race, need that.
That's
need
true.
That push.
It's true. I mean, you remember going to school. I remember going to school at that time, where it feels like you're fighting the battles of your 5th grade class or your 4th grade class, and it's hard for you to see your future outside of just that little room. It's hard for you to imagine what you'll be doing, or it's hard for you to imagine being a big, tall adult and doing grown-up things. You can imagine being a cowboy or a fireman, but how you get from one place to the other, you have no clue, or you can't even imagine what you're going to be doing. When you're 6 or 7 or 8 years old, you really can't imagine what you're going to be doing later.
Yeah. You know what? One thing that occurred to me in preparing for this conversation is this ought to be a movie. This play, shouldn't it?
I think it would be a great movie. Yeah, I think it'd be a great movie. I think there should be a movie about Challenger, and I think you should look at all of the crewmen in Challenger, and I think that would be a beautiful
part of it.
film. Yeah. It'd be a beautiful film, because it was a great crew. I mean, you had Krista McAuliffe, but you also had Dr. Judy Resnick. She was the 2nd woman astronaut in space. She was a Jewish American. You also had Colonel Ellison Onizuka, a Japanese American. Yeah. It was a real sort of like a Star Trek sort of group.
It was.
Very much a Star Trek group. Very representative and of high achievers and of people who were great communicators as well, because that's what NASA was looking for. I think it'd be a beautiful story.
Yeah. I was just doing the arithmetic. You were talking about it being 20 years, almost 30.
Right, yeah, almost 30 years.
86,
yeah,
14.
Yeah. Kids are in their 30s who were born at that time.
Yeah. Tell us about the Dr. King play.
Dr. King, of course, follows the life.
What's it called, Shawn?
Well, it's called Dr. King's Dream.
Dr. King's Dream.
Dr. King's Dream. And the play, it starts from the last night of Dr. King's life, and he's talking about his past. He's sitting in his hotel room in Memphis at the Lorraine Motel, and he's recounting the history of his life and the triumphs and a lot of the real challenges that he went through during the Civil Rights Movement. And so it follows him. We follow him from 1956 and the boycott in Birmingham, all the way back to that hotel room again. The structure is a little bit similar. And at the end of it, his assassination on that 2nd floor balcony at the Lorraine.
You play the whole thing?
Yeah, the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. It's such a, the span of his life, the things that he did, and he was 39 when he died. It's hard to imagine that he was such a young man when he died. The challenges of the Civil Rights Movement had aged him quite a bit. By the time he died, they said that he had the heart of of a 60-year-old, even though he was only 39. So I follow him from the bus boycotts in Montgomery all the way back to the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, the bombings in Birmingham, the three little girls who were killed in the Sunday school, back to the Selma to Montgomery March, even a little bit about the brief meeting between, or non-meeting between him and Malcolm X. And so King sort of puts himself in context as part of that one-man story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been history's replete since his death of people chronicling his life. What makes this account different or maybe special?
I don't know if it is. I just think
it's just another take?
It's not another take. It's a personal take. It's King recounting his life himself. So I think it's a very personal take on it. And again, I'm always shocked at, especially some of my younger audiences, their history with Martin Luther King is just not, all of the spaces are not necessarily all filled in there. They have a very sort of, perhaps one-dimensional sort of idea of, they know they did the I Have a Dream speech. They sort of know that, but what he was really working for and struggling for, sometimes that gets left out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you hope to possibly impart that to someone who's so young? I mean,
well, 45 minutes. I do what I can in 45 minutes. Yeah, I do what I can.
I mean, what about his life and death do you think that young people who social
don't understand? Well, social justice, first of all. I mean, you think of King as being a proponent of the civil rights movement and of freedom for African Americans, but what he was also working with was the idea of social justice and of economic equality. You remember the last thing that King was working on was the Poor People's March in Washington, D.C. He was going to have wagon trains that were coming in with people of color and poor people from Appalachia, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, all of them coming to Washington, D.C. as a visible representation of those who have been left behind by sort of that capitalist impulse. And I mean, after his death, certainly Johnson spearheaded the war on poverty, and so a lot of programs did come out of that sort of impulse. But that's where King was headed, was that it's one thing to say that a man has the right to sit at a lunch counter and have a cup of coffee, but he also needs to be able to afford to sit at that lunch counter and have that cup of coffee. And those are the issues that King was working on at the end of his life, was real social justice. And that's how he was killed, going down to Memphis for the sanitation workers strike down in Memphis. A lot of people thought that he was crazy to be dividing his energies up at the same time as he was trying to get this march ready to go to Washington. But he said, I have to do it. It's something that is the right thing to do, and he went down there and he ended up paying for it with his life.
I often like to ask this question of my guests when the topic makes it germane. What do you think Dr. King would think if he were alive today, of what has happened since?
Oh, well, I mean, I can certainly imagine. I'm sure he would be stunned at the election.
African-American president.
Well, absolutely, at the election of Barack Obama, and also the relative prosperity of some African-Americans in this country. But I also think that, I mean, imagine King going through the 80s, the greed American 80s, and sometimes what we're in right now. I think that he would be concerned about the inequalities in income and that we're experiencing in this country right now. It was some of the last things that he was working on. So I think that he would be very proud that his people, as he called it, had come so far. But I think that he was also working on the issues of social equality for all Americans. Because, one of the things King said was that freeing African Americans was also going to free everybody. He's, that the white man would be free as well as the black man, that no man is an island. No man can be what he ought to be until the poor man is who he ought to be. And so that's where I think he would be thinking.
Well, forgive me for asking you to do this, because you've only been doing the show 2 weeks, you said, right?
Yes.
You want to do something from that? from the King? Play?
You know what I'll do? I'll do, yeah, if I can. Maybe a little something from the March on Washington. Is that all right?
Yeah, whatever's.
As long as your microphone's going to be all right. All right, let's see. I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a beacon light of hope for millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro still lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and exile in his own land.
Wow.
Thanks.
Wow. You've got that down, man.
I got that one part down.
You have got that down. Wow, what an, that's, I think we've all forgotten, and like we've talked about, unfortunately, some people never were exposed to just what a tremendous orator.
Absolutely.
Communicator.
And a communicator for an amazing cause. I think with King, you've got two things. You've got a great communicator, a great orator, and then you've also got that amazing subject matter, which is, and it just rivets you.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, someone willing to speak out against social injustice, there's always that tingle of, ooh, that guy's going to get in trouble. Something's going to happen to him, because it's just that we don't talk about that. We've decided that that's something we just don't talk about anymore. That you either have or you don't. And if you don't have, then it's your own fault for not getting it. And so, good luck to you, man. Maybe, here's a buck at the street corner, and that's it. Because people don't talk about social stuff anymore. You just don't. So anybody who, even now, King seems like a radical. And then he really must have seemed like a radical. And that's what I'm saying, is like for a lot of kids, he's been a little defanged in terms of, I have a dream, black boys and black girls and white boys and white girls joining hands as sisters and brothers. They hear that part, but you don't hear, the other part that we have come to this, we have come to Washington, D.C. to cash a check. And I refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice has insufficient funds. Nobody wants to hear that part,
Yeah, and again, you can't hope to have anybody who wasn't alive at that time understand the context of the time.
It was a revolution.
Yeah,
we were in the middle of a revolution in our country. I mean, if you look at the assassinations alone, not even the riots outside of the Democratic Convention, was it 66? All of that. But the assassination of Kennedy, of John Kennedy, of Robert Kennedy, of Malcolm X, of Martin Luther King. All in such a short period of time. Anybody who had a paranoid theory, you don't have to be paranoid. It was a paranoid time. Not to mention what was going on in the world and, America with Cuba, and there was a lot of fishy stuff going on, man.
Yeah.
And the CIA in this country, we were very, very active. And when Malcolm X said, he was a little misquoted, and, the chicken's coming home to roost, what he meant was all that violence that, the toppling of governments that America was doing over in Iran and in South American countries, it was like he said, that violence came back to America. It was a violent time. It was a very violent time. So you're right. It's difficult to have the context of what was really going on in America. What a very dangerous time it was in America.
Yeah, and here we are, what, 45, 50 years later, and you know, people coming up now probably will refer 45, 50 years from now just as emotionally about their past as I mean, it's a crazy world today too.
It's pretty crazy. It's hard to match anything to what was going on in the mid to late 60s in this country. That was a crazy time. I mean, we're fat and happy compared to then.
For sure.
Yeah.
Shawn, what's up in your future? I mean, you want to stay with Mixed Blood Theater, or what's your ambition?
Of course. My love is to be a performer and to touch audiences, and I love the challenges that come with my work of being able to be somebody different, you know, every 4 weeks or so. And I'm going back to Minneapolis now to start Cyrano de Bergerac. I'm going to start working on my sword play and start fitting into a pair of tights. It is time to put on the tights, as they say. And then after that, I go back to Houston, and another total flip. I've got a new play about the end of the Civil War. Actually, at the end of the Civil War on a Jewish plantation. 2 slaves that are left over, and the young master comes back, and they actually celebrate the Seder. Lincoln has just been assassinated, and this family is celebrating the end of bondage together.
Yeah.
With the end of bondage, the Jewish end of bondage, and also the end of bondage of African Americans within the context of America at that time. And so I'm very excited about that too. So, you know, what I love is going from project to project and being able to change and seeing the world, seeing another side of the world and being able to play that. It's like living inside of a novel. I love it.
Well, this has been a really great conversation. You have a website, Facebook?
No.
You don't do any of that?
I don't do any of that.
Fine.
Look, if you want to go to Mixed Blood Theater, you can go to their website. You can see some stuff there. But look, if you want to Google Shawn Hamilton, I always pop up doing something.
Good.
Yeah.
You know, this will be on YouTube. It'll be on television in the market. So if anybody would like to book Mixed Blood, that would be the place to do it on the website.
Call Mixed Blood. Call them up. Yeah, call them up. They have a lot of fine shows, and call up Mixed Blood Theater.
Got a couple minutes left. Anything that I haven't asked you that you want to share with the greater Omaha area?
No, like I said, I've been here before with my other show with Little House on the Prairie, the musical. So
we didn't ask you to sing or play the saxophone.
At this time in the morning, it's probably a good thing you didn't ask me to sing. But I've been here before, and I love the Omaha area, and I'm just happy to have a chance to come back. And your weather is beautiful, so thanks for getting me out of Minneapolis.
Well, it is right now. We've still got a few weeks to go before we can say for good.
It's been beautiful to be on the road and to meet so many great people and to have a chance to be in Omaha. I'm happy to be here. It's great to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you at the college, and thanks so much for being with us on Metro and More.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for being with us for Metro and More. Our goal is to better acquaint you with the mission, leadership, and the reach of the college. I'm Kent Pavelka for Metropolitan Community College.
This has been a MetroVision production produced by Metropolitan Community College.
For me, Metropolitan Community College was a very reliable choice. All the credits I earned at MCC easily transferred over to UNO, where I completed my bachelor's degree in education. Now, I am an elementary school teacher right here in Omaha. Ahora soy instructora en un programa de 2 idiomas.
Metropolitan Community College has delivered quality education to the metro area for 40 years. The reliable option is Metropolitan Community College.